can break it down like whatever you want. I'm coming quick with the sound, coming quick with the funk. Like whatever you want.
Yes, I'm doing my thing.
Do my thing, I do what I do. Walk the line, I play my kazoo.
Hey guys, for this week's strategy segment, I decided to do an in-depth hand history review of this hand that was posted on 2+2 poker forums in the Heads Up No Limit category. So basically what I'm going to be doing is going through each individual decision and just analyzing the math and the different options, and then also looking at a couple of different scenarios and ranges. So I hope you guys enjoy, and let's get started. So on the flop we check, which is pretty standard. We've got top pair, pretty good kicker, and a backdoor flush draw. Villain bets, and we decide to check raise. I think check raising is fine here. It's a little bit thinner than I would normally go for value. However, if you're planning on check raising a lot of flops as bluffs, this is a good way to start off the match, check raising fairly thinly for value. And there's also the possibility that villain will call you down pretty light early on in the match, because this board is so dry and we're really not repping all that much, since we're probably 3-betting pocket queens and ace king or ace queen and aces and kings, and most villains will not perceive you to be check raising flops that thinly with hands as thinly as queen jack and queen 10 for value early on. So he's going to be calling down pretty light on later streets if he's a good regular. Now, as far as villains betting range on the flop is, I think early on in a match most good villains are going to be betting somewhere around 100%. Just because they're going to be trying to kind of fill you out, and they're probably not going to be doing too much pot control. So in Combinator, what I've given him here is, since he's a good regular, I'm giving him a range of 80% opening, and on the flop, I'm going to give him, he's going to continue with any 5, any 3, any pair, 6s or better, any gut shot, any queen, and probably ace king high. So I'm going to plug that in right here. So here's the range that I've come up with that he's going to continue with. So he's going to be folding this ungrouped portion of hands right here, the gray. He's going to be folding, and that's 55.3% of the time. So we can see this would probably be a good spot to check raise as a bluff. He's going to have a pair of 3s or better 35.7% of the time. A gut shot or better 7% of the time, and he's going to have just two overcard floats about 2% of the time. And I don't really expect villain to be 3-betting flop that much with the top of his value range, such as 2-pair plus, mainly because this board is so dry. He will expect that most of our range is going to be bluffs, and therefore he's going to be flatting with most of his range that he chooses to continue with. And as for whether or not our raise is good for value on the flop, let's go ahead and take a look at our equity versus his range. So versus the overall grouped range, the range that he continues with, we have about 72% equity, so it's definitely a fine flop value raise. So the turn is the 4 of hearts, and this is a pretty interesting card, I think. It improves our opponent's perceived range, because a lot of the range we perceive him to have is either completed to having a straight or has picked up a pair and now has more raw equity to continue with. However, it also improves a fair amount of our perceived range, such as like ace-deuce suited, 6-7, maybe a hand like 4-6. However, I think a lot of the also stuff like ace-4 suited. However, I think that villain will expect us to shut down with a lot of the hands like the gut shots in the flop that made a pair on the turn, because we won't really be betting for value or as a bluff. So that on this turn, I think villain will probably expect us to be betting like our Queen X plus and our straights here, and also some occasional pure air. So given all of that, versus our opponent's range on the turn, based on his flop range versus his total turn range, we have 62% equity. Now, so as a value bet on the turn, it is going to be plus EV if he calls with his entire range. However, I don't necessarily think he's going to be calling with his entire range. And I'm going to be subtracting some hands from his range that I think he'll be folding. So I'll go over that in a second. So of the range that he gets to the turn with, the range that I expect him to fold, or for a good regular to fold, are going to be only the hands that are a 3 that have not that do not have any sort of redraw. I think the rest of his range, such as 5x, any 3 with a gut shot, or a flush draw, or any ace high type hand, will peel again, and definitely all of his queens will peel again. And I also expect, 6s through jacks to peel as well. So I think that that's pretty much the range that he's going to be calling with on the turn. So he's not folding too much on the turn. And we can see here that versus this adjusted range, we actually have 60% equity. So it's a pretty clear value bet. I think that our turn bet here can be bigger, because I think most of those hands that he's going to be peeling with, not regardless of our bet size, but we can go up to $18 or $19, and it makes it a little bit easier for us to shove river. So the river is the ace of clubs, and I think this is a pretty bad card for us, because this card improves our opponent's range quite a bit, and is pretty bad for our range. We don't really have too much ace X in our range, and we don't really have too much deuce X in our range either. So it's going to be a pretty bad card for us. And if we take a look at our equity versus his total turn continuing range on the river, we have about 55% equity versus his total range on the river. So we're still doing okay. So does that mean we should value bet? Well, we have 55% equity versus his total range, but not necessarily versus his calling range. So now what we need to do is trim down his river calling range to see if a value bet is correct in this situation. So the hands that I expect him to fold on the river when we bet are going to be any of the 5s that have not improved to making a 2-pair or a straight. So all those 5s are going to be folding. All of the 3s that have not improved are also going to be folding. And I also expect him to probably fold most of his random pocket pairs up to probably like jacks. I realize that these have the same effective hand strength as any of these mid-strength queens, but I think there is a huge difference between the frequency that an opponent calls the river here with like Queen X versus pocket jacks. Part of that being combinatorics, more of that just being people don't like folding top pair as much as they like folding under pairs, even though the effective hand strength is the same. So versus that calling range on the river, we can see that we only have 25% equity versus our opponent's range, so versus his calling range. So therefore, it's going to be a pretty bad value bet. Okay, so given that we've established that a river value bet is going to be minus EV, can we bet as a bluff? And the quick answer, I think, is no, because the range that I don't think we're going to be folding out too many better hands when we shove here or bet. So I think a bet as a bluff is going to be pretty bad. I'm not going to go too much in depth into that, but I think you guys will agree with me there. And so since we can't value bet and we can't bluff, that leads us to a check as being our only option. Now when we check, if villain checks behind, obviously we have no decision. So we need to be thinking about, do we check call if villain bets this river? This is going to depend on one thing and one thing only, really, and that is villain capable of turning made hands into a bluff, and how frequently will he do that? I think a very good opponent is going to be turning a lot of his 5x and 4x into bluffs on this river. And I think an average regular, a good average regular, is probably going to be turning hands into a bluff here maybe 25% of the time. So if this guy is extremely good, maybe. So let's go ahead and analyze how much equity we will have if he is turning 100% of his hands into bluffs that don't beat us on the river. And so we can see here that since it's just the same range, we have 55% equity versus our opponent's range when he bets. So any bet size he makes is going to be plus EV for us to call. So for the average villain who is going to be only value betting top pair or better in this situation, so he's not going to be value betting the worst queens, and who is only going to be turning his hand into a bluff maybe some of the time. I've only added in 36 combos, or I've only left 36 combos of 5x that he will turn into a bluff. I think this is a pretty sane river betting range for the average regular. So versus this range, we have right here 21.91% equity, so about 22% equity. So unless villain is betting a size like half pot, it's going to be minus EV to call this river. So if villain is very, very good and extremely aggressive, then it is possible that calling the river will be good. However, the much more likely scenario is that this guy is not turning that many hands into bluffs, especially just the average 100-0 regular. It does not turn hands into bluffs very much. They much prefer to get their hand to showdown in these types of scenarios. So I think this is a pretty clear-cut river check fold. And when I looked at this hand history, that was basically what I thought. However, I thought that this would be a good one to break down and just show you guys how the math of it works. So I hope this has been beneficial. If you guys disagree with any of the assumptions that I've made in this thread, that's fine. Please leave a comment in the thread or as a comment on my blog. So yeah, I hope this is beneficial, and take it easy, guys.